anyways, folks have just gathered in the room. So it's great seeing folks. So we're in our second workshop in the leadership development track. And it's my pleasure to introduce Pastor Alex Chang. Reverend Alex Chang is lead pastor of Princeton Alliance Church, a multi-ethnic church with over 85 ethnicities represented. This is no joke. This is where I worship. It's one of the most diverse churches I've ever been to. Although he grew up as a pastor's kid in a Korean immigrant church, ministry was never part of his vocational plan originally. He earned a BA in economics from Boston College and worked as a banker for several financial institutions in New York City before moving to Princeton and to earn his MDiv from Princeton Theological Seminary. He is an ordained minister in the Christian and Missionary Alliance denomination and also serves as vice chairman on the Metropolitan District Executive Committee of the CNMA. He is currently pursuing a DMin at Fuller Theological Seminary. Let's welcome Pastor Alex Chang.
So, the talk today is called Best Practice, or my journey, kind of discovering best practices for an emotionally healthy staff. We have a staff of about 25 at our church. There's beauty in that and there's difficulty in that. I want to share some of my story of how I even got to this church and what brought me here. But if your staff is significantly smaller than that or even bigger than that, my challenge to you is to consider, how do I learn how to scale up or scale down? Because I think there are some best practices or considerations that I think every single person or every leader can think about in order to actually elevate and prioritize mental health, right? And so let me just say one word of caution. Please don't go back to, like, if you're not the senior pastor or lead pastor, don't go back to your lead pastor and be like, hey, you got to change this, change that, right? Like, make all these changes, like, I'm not, mentally healthy or whatnot. I don't want nasty emails. I get enough of those, but I really hope that you can just consider seriously, I think the three main points that I want us to think through. So let me give some context about our church. Just like Dr. David said, just like we are extremely diverse. I grew up, and that'll be kind of part of my story, but I grew up in a Korean American church, Korean immigrant church. At best, it was about 100 people. Now our church, I don't know, we don't count per se, but it's over 1,000, right? And coming from a small church context, the only other church I ever served besides my current church, and I've been here about a decade, is my dad's church, right? So I literally have 100-person church, and then let's just say 1,000-person church, and everything in between, I don't know. Like I said, I think we all have the skills and abilities to be able to scale up and scale down. I think that's why we're here. But we are highly ethnically diverse. We have probably more than even, at this point, this is 2017 when we took that survey, probably over 100 ethnicities represented at this point in time. Our leadership, so our governing board and our staff are highly representative of the local community in which we live, which is actually Princeton. It's literally a 10-minute drive right down the street off of Route 1. We are socio-economically diverse as well. We are highly involved in our local community. We actually have a food pantry where the local Plainsboro Township actually tells their clients to come to our pantry. So we serve over 200 families a month, right? And we give them bags of food. They don't shop. They used to shop, but post-COVID things have changed, but they submit a request for their needs for the month, and we give them a bag every Wednesday and Thursday night. So we are highly involved. We believe our pantry clients are also part of our family, right? And so we make sure that we receive their prayer. They might not attend our church. They may not even be Christian, but they're part of our family. So we receive, along with their food order, prayer requests so that we can keep them in mind every single week. We are highly involved with what we call our global partnerships. So we have long range and long-term partnerships with missionaries. We are called the Christian and Missionary Alliance, but we believe in global and overseas mission work. But we're also now highly focused on the global diaspora, meaning the people who have immigrated here from all backgrounds, and we want to serve them. So we actually started recently a separate nonprofit because we want to help resettle refugees. We believe that literally the world is coming here. So what can we do to best serve them? And our staff ages range from 23 to 68. Kind of right smack in the middle. Um, Let me just say one more comment about our ethnic diversity. There is no major ethnic group that is dominant either. So if you think about the whole color palette, I'm Korean American, but there is no, like, it's not 40% Koreans. Actually, there's very few Koreans in our church, right? There, if you walk in, you'd be surprised at South Asian, East Asian, African, Latino, Latina, right? White, the whole gamut, European, everywhere. They're coming from everywhere. They're part of our church. And one thing that I have to say about our church demographics is we did not do anything specific to make it multicultural or intercultural, whatever. It's just a gift. We steward it well, but I can't tell you when I first came here about a decade ago, it was not as diverse. It become extremely diverse after that, but it was just a gift. So I'm not here to even tell you like you have to do this, you have to do that. I'm not the same about that, but just for context, because I think sometimes you see something like this and you, oh, that's the goal. I don't know though. I'm not there. Uh, but we do have a great picture of heaven on earth. And so I'm very proud and honored to be a part of this church and this family. Um, yeah, so that's the context I'm coming from. And so, like I said, for you, it's just to scale up or scale down. But the next part is just let me just share a little bit of my story. I'm a second generation pastor, meaning my father's a pastor. In fact, my older brother is a pastor as well, but now he's a chaplain with the U.S. Marines in Asia Pacific. And growing up in the church, I didn't never wanted to be a pastor because we were poor, and I was like, I'm okay with this." In fact, my wife, she's also a pastor's kid, and she used to pray never to marry a pastor. And so it's a concept we're both coming from, my wife and I. And I worked on Wall Street for about a decade before coming to seminary. So this is kind of my second career. But again, this is just context. This is Korean immigrant church. I grew up in that context, and I was part of the English service or EM for a while. And I loved my church. It's not even because it's my father's church. I just loved my church. Right. And so for me, as I'm thinking about our church, I'm also now, yeah, of course, scaling up because it's a bigger church, whatever you want to call it. But I am trying to bring like the small church dynamic, the feel of a small church to a bigger church. And that's, I feel like, one of my callings actually to this local church. All right. And so um again, just very quick backstory. Being emotional was not something I ever was taught how to do or was demonstrated in my family. Both mom and dad are relatively stoic. I never cried, and I thought actually crying was a form of weakness. So I was like, okay, no, we're never gonna do this. Um, and then when I entered my 20s, I started working on Wall Street. I started to feel just emotionally unhealthy, maybe even at times unstable. And then the Great Recession hit, and I got let go. And then your identity that's wrapped up, or my identity that was wrapped up in what I did, came to ruin. I was on the corporate ladder climbing up, and then all of a sudden the ladder is gone, and you have no idea who you are, no idea what you're about. And I really wrestled with God. I really wrestled with God. But that's when I really started to think about and pursue just receiving mental health treatment through counseling. Right. Then in my late 20s, even before I felt the real call to pursue ministry, I just knew that even in a healthy place for me, I needed help. Even if I was emotionally stable, emotionally healthy, I still needed someone to to just walk alongside of me, to hold me accountable in some ways, but just check in. In fact, this past Sunday, I shared a story about that journey of my life. It wasn't about mental health at all, actually, but it was just something that I was processing, and I want to share that. And I think that is a part of our any leader's job is to actually create the framework, create the vision for what mental health could look like. Because a lot of people, especially in my church, going to a mental health professional is taboo. In fact, someone this past Sunday asked for prayer and said, "Can you give me the courage to pursue and seek out somebody?" Because she was of Indian descent, and never would they consider that. Why? Because even my mom was asking me, like, "What's wrong with you? Why aren't you praying?" Well, I'm sorry, my praying's not working. Like that's the kind of stuff that a lot of, at least for me, in the Asian American, Korean American context. When my wife and I got married, we were both in our 30s. Let me see if I'm just, but in my 30s, we got married. He's still working. I was just coming into seminary. We got married, and the first year and a half, I don't know about you, but my marriage sucked. Like we fought all the time. We yelled at each other. We slammed doors. Divorce. We talked about divorce. It was so bad. And so I was first year seminary student. I was like, I'm not going to go into ministry when my marriage sucks. Really, I'm just not going to do it. So even through Princeton Seminary, I attended here. Through Princeton Seminary, I sought out counseling, and we found a great counselor who was just a couple towns over. And if it wasn't for those 18 months of counseling, I don't know if we would be married right now, to be honest. My wife and I are very strong proponents of marriage therapy, because it really saved our marriage. And I can talk about that personal stuff. And even today, I seek out a spiritual coach. I actually have someone, a third party, not related to anything that I do professionally, just an outside party who I pay to be my spiritual. Right. So that's kind of my, I don't know, last couple decades journey of seeking out mental health. But let's get into practical, because that's really what I want to help with. Um, there are three things I think, and many you guys already know this, but let me just affirm you. You have to really consider where you are, what context you're in, what church context you have, your leadership type. And I think I'll probably spend a lot of time here. And then the third thing is, what does your staff need and what do they want? Right. Not what you want for them, but what do they need? What do they want? Again, even if you have a staff of 3, you have to ask these 3 things. If you have a staff of 50, you probably thought about this, but let's just jump right in. Location. I'm going to use the word exegesis because, we're in Princeton Seminary. That's where I learned how to do exegesis, right? But many of you have already thought about this. You have to ask yourself, where is my church, my nonprofit, whatever context you're in? What context do you actually live in? And it's beyond just demographic research. It really is, what's the feel, what's the culture of your area? And what are people longing for? What are they striving for? There's great resources out there. Mission Insight is one of them. If you are part of, I think, the United Methodist Church or Mainline, they actually outsource their demographic research. Gloo, GLOO, I think Barna Group just recently bought them last year. They are also a great resource to look up demographics to understand what are people struggling with. They use data analysis, and it's actually quite strong. You have to ask yourself the question, in my opinion, these are my opinions, how are marriages doing in your area? Really, this is like a real thing. There's a lot of tension in marriages. What are your local high school students, middle school students struggling with? Your youth groups are a great place to start. You got to care about young people, because that also is projected onto parents. What does the local township need help with? Our local town is probably a middle to upper middle class. So they ask us for very different things. So when a homeless person shows up in the middle of a upper middle class area, police, the township, actually, they don't know what to do. But they call us and they say, hey, can you help? Right. We're also local to Trenton. It's 10 miles down the road, maybe not even. and we have a great relationship with the mayor's office. So during COVID, they had a need to actually kind of help with like fire code for the people who are um, kind of struggling with just to make ends meet financially. So they asked us to purchase 200 fire alarms so they can put into houses, right? So we made inroads. We put a lot of time into making a great relationship with Trenton. But what do they need? I don't think churches often ask enough questions about the local surroundings. Like, hey, how can I serve you instead of just growing the church? That's again, this is all my opinion. Cultural exegesis. What religions are around you? That's kind of the spiritual tone, right? For example, in our area, a little bit more east of Princeton, in the general vicinity of 10 miles radius, there are 8 Hindu temples, quite large. In fact, the largest temple outside of India is in Robbinsville, which is 15 miles away from, right? So there's a huge and massive Hindu population here. So what are they thinking about? What are they struggling with? What are they feeling spiritually? I think that's super important. And then just the people who live in your community, and what are the work patterns that they're uh, experiencing? Right now, there's massive layoffs in the large corporations. Right? It might not affect you as a pastor or nonprofit person, but this really affects the psyche of people who are attending your church or part of your community, right? Because there's that uncertainty. And so again, it's just, are you fully aware of the location in which you are living in and serving in? Um, here's just one thought about this. For example, during COVID, work from home became the only way that people commuted to work, right? Um, or work. So even today, like recently, we just started something called 21 Days of Prayer and Fasting. And so we do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6:15 in the morning to pray, and we do a Zoom call. Saturdays we do in person because I think they're still community gathering, that's super important. But Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they're so used to that now, right? You want to make use of it. So you have 100 people in the morning just praying on 6:15 to 6:45, and you're done. At 6:45, you're done, right? Because high stress people working high powered jobs, they have a timeline. I use calendar for everything. So do they. So let's try to serve them as best as you can because you're thinking about your location. You're thinking about what their needs are. I'll hold off Q&A. Um, the second consideration is specifically your leadership type. Your leadership type. And I have a few notes I don't want to miss here. So if I feel like it feels like I'm reading, I am. So I have found that Asians don't realize how Asian they are, right? Until like there is an epiphany. For example, growing up in a Korean American church, I spoke English 95% of the time. But when I came to a non-Asian centric church, I realized there are some words that I would be so accustomed to using that like I had to just force myself to refrain from using certain words, right? And so I just learned, okay, that is one thing. But then I've also grown up in a smaller Korean church, and I had some ideas and thoughts about what a church to look like, feel like. And when I'm coming into a different context, all of that is shattered too, right? So again, I had to learn myself, my context. Um, and I grew up in a church where the power distance or power gap was quite significant, right? If you're not an elder or the pastor, you're not even allowed on like the stage, for example, right? Or the main sanctuary area that's like 2 steps up, right? So here's a story. I've recently taken over as lead pastor of our church. And during the installation service, my son, I'm not sure if you were there, Dave, but my son was running around on stage, and my parents are in the front row, like, Dominique, come here right now, like yelling at him, like it's just really interesting how it plays out. And then I get home, and my parents are telling my child, so my parents are like not scolding because he's 3, but like teaching him, if you're not a pastor, you don't go on stage. And I came home, and I'm like, What are you teaching him? I love, like, first, I love the fact that my son feels comfortable enough to be on stage, running around, like the way David danced, like that. I just felt free. Again, we just learned about the intergenerational differences, and how to be empathetic. Um, so instead of getting angry, which would have been my natural response, I understood. Right? And I haven't had the conversation yet, but I will. But again, what is your leadership style? Um, and this question could be quite open ended, and it's hard for me to answer and to give you tips on how to answer that. But this is how we try to help leaders in our church, staff members on our church, in our church staff, um, learn more about themselves. So we use assessments. I think I've actually named a few of them. Yep. Strength Deployment Inventory is called SDI. It's kind of created by Elias Porter and Tim Scudder. Cool. Enneagram, I'm not sure where your position is, I think. Okay. I'll leave it there. APAS, Alan Hirsch. I studied him in seminary. He's a great guy. Met him a couple of times at this point, and I look it up. I'm not here to talk about. Strength Finder is also a very unique one. I think it's super helpful. So we use those to help people kind of learn about themselves, staff members learn about themselves, and then we do something that we just started about 4 years ago, 360 reviews. So 360-degree reviews. So for example, if I'm, for the lack of better terms, like middle management, because we do have some tiers, then the people who report into you, your manager gives you a downward, right? And then a colleague, another pastor or a director would give you feedback, being in meetings and stuff. And then you get the volunteers from those specific ministries give feedback as well, because you don't create the space to learn about who you are and how you actually come off to people. I don't think you can actually know your leadership style, your type, right? Your quality. Are you a good leader? You know, these are such bad categories, but are you a better pastor versus leader or volunteer developer? But we want to help all of our staff get better, And so, eventually I will get to mental health, by the way, but these are all part of equipping and tooling people so that they are more confident as well, right? As a leader, if you are the senior pastor or lead pastor or a director role or executive director role, whatever thing that you're in, I do think you have to ask yourself the question of what is, uh, what does it mean to be a team player? Lencioni writes a book called The Ideal Team Player. We use that as a resource, but he says someone who's humble, hungry, and smart. Those are the categories in which he uses. We like that. We don't promote that out loud, but it's just something we have our staff read just so that they can talk about it. And you can using common language. Um, yeah, the ideal team player. And if you're going to be on a staff of 3 or 30, you really need to know who do you need to surround yourself with? Because if you're going to hire the same type of person, good luck, right? Because again, if you're more abrasive, naturally you hire another person. You know what? Attraction that's nice too, but it's not helpful if you're actually serving in a community, right? You need the various personalities, various leadership styles, and you really have to watch because your natural tendency will be actually you like yourself, so you're going to like, a certain style. I really try to fight that. That's why we use assessment when we hire, right? So if someone is further down in the interview process, we'll send out some of the assessments that we use so that we can see how they would fit onto a team, right? Again, it doesn't matter if it's staff of 2, 3, or 30. I think these are just valuable things to consider. So one of the things when I was being interviewed for a church that the board asked me was like, "What's your vision?" And I said, "I want to make a big church feel small." That doesn't work for everybody, actually, but it's because I am starting to tie in my upbringing. Like I said, I only have 2 churches on my list. Because my last church, Nissan Church in Northern New Jersey, and he's not the pastor, he's retired, and Princeton Alliance Church. I'm still on the journey of figuring that out, but I know I can do this, and then I kind of have figured this out by being here for 10 years, right? And now, but I want to make beauty of the feel of what I experienced to make that a reality and scale up for the big church and also scale it down for that feel for the family. Um, but there's a couple of things as I thought about this. Why is this so important? Is because that idea, it really comes from my corporate experience. Like 10 years on Wall Street, a lot of stuff, a lot of great experiences, a lot of long hours. My hair started falling out exactly at 23, but it was amazing. I had so much fun. I learned a lot about myself, but it really gave me thick skin. Being in ministry gives you a soft heart. So I use that language often for our leaders and our pastors. You need to have both. All right. So I'm using what I've experienced, and I'm trying to normalize that language of yeah, you need thick skin because any church work or anything that you do serving somebody, you're gonna get hurt, right? But we have to realize again, thick skin, but tender heart, right? So that's again language like that to normalize. Yeah, you're gonna suffer, you're gonna go through torment. People are gonna retaliate and say mean things, but where's your heart, right? You will recover, right? But where's your so again, those types of things I'm trying to weave in my experiences in life. Before we go to the last point, I never sought to be lead pastor anywhere, actually. I felt called to ministry at a very young age, and I fought ministry for a very long time. But even when I came to this church, I actually always thought, cool, I'm just going to serve wherever. I was really open handed about it. Um, and then year after year, they would just give me more responsibilities. And that's kind of how I became the lead pastor. I can't give you a track. I don't know how it happened. But one thing that I've learned through that time is I like the second chair. I'm not one of those people who likes the spotlight, right? I don't like I like preaching, but I don't need to preach all the time. I love listening to my other preachers on our team. Like I really enjoy it. I laugh when they tell corny jokes. Like I like it. That's just my personality style. And so even my leadership style is more like that. I know when to step up. I've seen my dad do. Right? I worked on Wall Street, so I know when you have to elevate yourself for the sake of the organization. I get it. But for me, first share was never the thing. And I think I've really learned that through counseling, being okay totally as a number two guy. Right. But I've also learned that as a number two guy, there are things that you lead up and you lead down. And there is a beauty. So the reason why I say that is because not all of us were called necessarily to the first chair, and that's okay. But coming to that realization, I actually felt a lot more peace, right? So even emotionally, even mentally, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm good. If the board says to me, I interviewed for the lead pastor role, and they say no, I'll be okay, right? So again, being a little bit more confident in how God has wired me, it helps because again, the assessments, the 360 reviews are just kind of bringing to light things I didn't know about myself or confirming things that I knew about myself, but you're allowing you to double down on those skills, right? The last part, who makes the final decision for your organization? In short, for my organization, it is me. I'm the lead pastor of our church, chairman of our governing board. But I never make a decision, especially a large one, but even minor ones in a vacuum. Because if I start doing that, just because I took over now, if I start doing that, the culture will change. And we are just talking about culture just like a couple hours ago. Culture for me is so important. The feel, the fabric, the conversations that are had. Like I don't take risks on culture. In fact, I invest in culture. I do whatever it takes so that our staff especially will always know this is how our church is going to feel, the vibrations of the church, for example. So if I start all of a sudden, I was in second chair, I'm a team player, and then all of a sudden become first chair and I start making all these executive decisions, that's going to throw some people off, right? And it's for us, staff of 25, that really make the difference. I think I have an example. So ultimately, I am the final decision maker. So this past week, we had a board meeting. And I'm kind of laying out the vision for 2024. We have an annual meeting coming up. And I laid out not even a strategy, not even a plan, but just my heart. And I presented something. And I got some pushback from about one of these 3 points that I was going to lay out. Right. And any leader, when you get pushback, like, here we go again. Maybe that's how you feel. It's like, okay, let me prepare my defense of how to convince my board or people around you. But I kind of sat back using listening skills that we just talked about too, because she's from complete different continent, right? She's about to share why she felt triggered by one of the points that I made. Then we were starting to wordsmith, like, oh, then you should change this, then you should change that. And I kind of started laughing. There was so much input. I said, none of you guys are going to stand up there February 11th and deliver the message, right? I hear everything that you say, and I love what you say. I'm going to take to heart everything you say. In fact, I wrote down wrote all the things that you had to say, but we're in this together. And we kind of laughed about it. Yeah, like, yeah, you're not going to say a single, they're just sitting in the audience, right? They're supporting the vision because they're on the board. The next day, literally right after our morning prayer time, I get a text from the individual who had been cautioned, and she was praying through overnight as well about why she felt so triggered about that one point. And she was going through her own like mental health check or triggering check. And she would just say, you know what? I'm with you. Our church needs this. It's a completely different context than what she grew up in. And so she's just go for it. Support you, whatever. Right. Yeah. At the end of the day, I said, yeah, this is my decision. I'm going to do this. But you're creating the space, even in laughter. Right. Laughter is a great neutralizer, by the way. Right. Even in laughter, telling them how you feel, but you're leaving the space open. Right. And so you can be the final decision maker, but it's the how it comes off that matters a lot. Last point, and then we'll go into like some real practical things. And I hope these are more practical. You got to really think about your staff needs. Fair financial compensation is mandatory. Asian Americans are notorious for underpaying. Straight up. I literally saw like a job description posted somewhere, like growing youth group and EM part-time or something like that. And I'm like, that is a recipe not only for disaster, but burnout immediately. And then again, I'm going to use my context. I've heard pastors, because I have friends who are in the Asian American church context, they're burned out and their senior pastor wants them to go to early morning prayer. And then you got to preach at early morning prayer like every third Sunday or every third Saturday, right? Like, these are just practical. These are just practical. Don't do the 2-for-1 pastors thing, meaning your spouse or the pastor's spouse is not on payroll. So don't do that. Don't do that. I actually explicitly say that to our staff. If we're about to be hired a few more pastors recently, and I sit down with the couple and I tell them to the wife, we are not paying you. There is no expectation. And I think a lot of people are surprised, like, whoa, like not even kids ministry, like that? No, because we were paying the pastor. She can do whatever. My wife works full time. She's actually the breadwinner in my family, right? She's done it for the last 10 years. And so I don't mess with that. And if you are a senior pastor, lead pastor, let me just be real practical here. Don't treat your youth pastors or associate pastor like they're not real pastors. That's not fair. It's just not true. Right. So again, that is not fair. Again, culture of your staff matters a lot, it actually matters more if it's smaller, I think, because you're setting the pace and the tone for your staff. I said office culture here, meaning, are you an in-office person? Like you require your staff to come in office and be present 9 to 5 or whatever. Maybe you do 9 to 8. I don't know. We have a 9 to 4-ish policy. We work on Sunday, Monday through Friday. Monday through Thursday is our in office, but we've instituted a work from home program, which I'll talk about because I want to get more practical. But why is this important? Is because trends have changed. Like I said, it's consideration number one. Trends have changed for the work from home culture. So we have for full time the same day of the week they can take work from home. And we have had to adopt some application software, for example, Slack. Right, we use that to communicate, and we have to update those statuses. So, just again, think about those types of things. Young families goes back to the youth pastor stuff. Young families, their needs are very unique and specific. It is a stage of life. I'm in that, so I know it. I'm sharing. I'm grateful for my church for understanding that. Post-COVID reality, flexibility is key. All right. So again, all right. This is kind of the meat. There is the difference versus what you want to call policy, what you consider a best practice, and what you would create a program for. And let me just start by saying you have to evaluate everything, because if you don't, everything will just crumble, because you will never know if something is good, something is bad, if it's working, if it's not working. We have a robust, I would say, 40-page employment manual. This is our policy, right? Pay time off. These are considerations that you guys really need to think about. We have vacation or personal solitude, comp days, and sabbaticals. Right. So Pastor Dave was sharing about first sabbatical in 30 years. We have a sabbatical policy, right? Continuing education is part of that. Benefits is part of that. Finance best practices right here is how we use our money. Right. There's policies embedded. For example, we actually do give corporate card or church labeled cards for our pastors and up. All right. So that's all in there. And then we have something called the work from home program, which is always a working document. This is what I think about when I think about these three words. Policy is something you must follow. Staff best practices, please follow. And then the program is trial and error. We'll figure it out as we go. All right. I'm just going to read it. If you are a leader, you paint the picture of the future for your staff. So this is what happens when you have too little vision. They're uninspired. Again, whether it's 2 people on your staff or 30. If you have too much vision, you're going to burn people out. Simple as that. Going. Policies provide guardrails for your staff. Too much policy, it feels like a corporate environment, right? Too little policy creates chaos. People never show up. They oh, I'm going to meet someone. They're meeting someone 30 hours a week. Chaos. This is where it matters. Relational capital. Relational currency is another way to talk about it. This is how it all comes together. And this is you as the leader, the person sitting here. How transparent are you with your staff? Are you a team or a family on your staff? Here's the difference. If you're going to call your staff a family, you don't fire family. Call yourself a high-powered team, you're giving permission to fire. All right. I'm still working out where we are, to be honest. This is really important. Are you honest and honoring in your feedback? We talk about 360-degree reviews. Honest means you're actually giving constructive criticism, but the way in which you do it is honoring. It's your language, it's the tone. You're not condemning. You're not shaming people for their inabilities, right? So you have to be honest if they're struggling and honorable. And this is something I literally actually use almost every conversation. Are you asking for my opinion on this or my approval on this? That's simple. I'm not going to go into details. If you want any of these resources, more questions, here's my contact. I'm done.